Thank you, Bells. Friends, please pray with me. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. This has been a hard week. A lot has happened in the last 8 days. I'm not going to pretend to be able to preach on everything that has happened, but I want to just tell you a few things. I'm in regular touch right now, as is David Clark, our associate minister, with the communities here in town, with Temple Isaiah, with Temple Amuna, as well as the Muslim community. They're some of my dear friends, the leaders and representatives of those communities, through the Lexington Interfaith Clergy Association. We send them Hancock love and wait to know better how we can support, how we can be of practical help with the things that are happening. I did attend the service on Wednesday evening at Temple Amuna. A handful of clergy were able to be there and simply in love and to share in their grief and their mourning, and the stories are truly heartbreaking. And I know from our Muslim representative that the threat against Muslims in the greater Boston area right now has gone up significantly. So there is so much to hold here, and we cannot pretend to know the answers, but what I do know is this, is that when things seem so very overwhelming and it's hard to know how to begin to address something, especially something that is millennia old here, what I do know is this, that it helps to remember the basics. It helps to remember what we can do, which actually is world-changing. And that is something that Ruth and Naomi know a lot about and can teach us a lot about again and again and again, and it's simply relationships. The relationships are the thing that actually change the world because they are the thing that change our hearts. The story opens today in the time of the Judges, which is how things open in the Bible. It begins with in the time of so-and-so, meaning who was king or who was the ruler. That matters because notoriously the time of the Judges was a time when everyone did what was right in their own eyes. What that means is it was a really hard time to be alive unless you were a person with great power. And most of the people in power were abusing that power, so those who were already really vulnerable were even more so. Certainly the widows in this time, or the orphans. So that's the backdrop against which this story happens, and just to summarize it briefly, we have Israelites, Naomi and her husband, who live in Bethlehem. There's a famine, they need food, they go to Moab. They also have 2 sons. Those 2 sons, while in Moab, marry Moabite women, which was perhaps a little bit questionable, but they did. And Naomi's husband dies. And I imagine Naomi still envisioning a long and full life with her extended family when more tragedy strikes and her 2 sons die. At this point, she has nothing to offer her daughters-in-law and says, please just go back to your own people and pray they will have mercy on you and take care of you. Orpah does. She leaves. We know nothing more of her story. Of course, we know that Ruth said, no, I'm staying right here with you. And she made her great plea and her great covenant. It's really seen as this covenant of relationship between Ruth and Naomi. Now, this was really unheard of for 2 women to band together like this and to figure this out on their own, but they did. They did this really out-of-the-box thing. And right as their backs are against the wall, thinking that there's really no other option, they see this option of doing it differently, of choosing a different path, of holding each other's hands, taking each other's hands, and doing it together. Sometimes when we think there is no way out, when we really think we're at the very end, is when we have the eyes to see the new possibility that God is creating, which is exactly what happens here. Because out of their sadness and their destitution, their tragedy, they became 2 unlikely friends who decided instead to call each other family of choice. That is what a church is. That is what a faith community is. that we take each other's hands and we say, we have our own covenant. We may not use the exact words, family of choice, but that is what it is, that we say we will be together through all the things, through sorrow, through joy, through celebrations, through births, through deaths, through transitions, through pandemics, through recessions, through wars, through capital campaigns, whatever it is. We will be together. We will take each other's hands. We will do it. It's the only way to do it. But it's always a little bit countercultural because there are not many places left in our culture, in our society, where that sort of thing happens for folks who aren't either married or our family who share blood or a name. Most of us share those things, but yet we have those bonds. It's a beautiful thing. And yet I'm hard-pressed to think of other places in our culture where that happens, where we have folks of all ages coming together to enjoy meals around a table. Some you know, some you don't. Where people come together to share Holy Communion, whether they are 1 or 101. Where we go on retreats together, where we take on amazing service projects like Coat Boston and the Christmas Shop and give away thousands and thousands of dollars outside of ourselves to our mission partners. There are not many places where that happens, and we take it for granted at our peril. This is a special place. Truly, I think about a time when little Charlotte Putnam, who is perhaps 3.5, came up to me at coffee hour and grabbed my finger and began to proceed to walk me out of coffee hour to give me a tour of the church, it seemed. She thought I needed that. Perhaps I did. Or a time when inexplicably my daughter at 1 leaps into the arms of Carolyn Aiken, who she's maybe seen 2 or 3 times. But there she goes, leaping into the arms. How would she know her? How would Carolyn know my daughter? These are not things that happen all the time. Well, Ruth and Naomi had no idea what would happen when they set out. They just kept walking. They went back to Bethlehem, really very unconventionally. They were permitted to stay near the land of their kinsman, or Naomi's kinsman, whose name was Boaz, who was a wealthy landowner. They were permitted to stay there and glean from the fields, meaning they could take the crops that weren't collected and they would have something to eat. So Ruth went about doing that. She was gleaning so she and Naomi could eat. And in that, she meets Boaz, and they get married. They have a son named Obed. Obed grows up. He has a son named Jesse. Jesse grows up. Jesse has a lot of kids. One of them happens to be named David. David was the unlikely choice for king. David, the one who then danced down the street in front of the Ark of the Covenant as it was returned home. David, of course, also had a bunch of kids, and the lineage went on and on and on till it found a young peasant girl, also very vulnerable, very unsure, and suddenly pregnant, who was visited by an angel and was told that she carried the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Naomi and Ruth took each other's hands. Out of their emptiness, God did amazing things. This is what God always does. We just simply need to say yes and take each other's hands. Amen.